Hello everyone, I am Profir-Petru and I will be presenting Flexeme. This is joint work with my supervisor, Earl Barr, and my co-authors, Santanu and Allamanis. Flexeme is a tool to separate tangled commits into their constituent atomic patches built on top of a multiversion nameflow graph. But what's a tangled commit? A tangled commit intertwines patches that solve unrelated concerns. Here, the developer changes how color schemes are handled as well as how characters are rendered in a terminal emulation program. Ideally, the hunks labeled 1 and 2 respectively should be committed separately. But what's the harm in leaving the changes tangled? Why should we care to separate them at all? Firstly, atomic commits enable tools such as git bisect and can reduce bias in statistical approaches trained over the version history with a promise of smarter tools for developers. Further, it can also provide cleaner interlinking between commits and requirements, aiding code and history navigation and comprehension, and even enabling semantic slicing with version histories. To aid the maintenance of atomic commits, we propose Flexeme. At its core lies the 𝛿-NFG. Starting from Liam Pattison's multiversion ICFG, we had version annotated data flows and name flows. The latter being a subset of data flows along which variable names could be inferred. A commit is thus encoded through the version annotations of nodes and edges. To untangle commits, we first assume each change is a separate concern. We build a collection of graphs by considering each change's neighborhood. We then cluster them using agglomerative clustering and using graph kernel for similarity. We managed to improve accuracy over 2 baselines we reproduce on an artificial corpus of 9 projects where we tangle commits to mimic developers forgetting to commit their workspaces between tasks. Flexeme is available at the link on the slide or via the QR code presented here. Thank you for your time.